Okay, so we've been through determining our adequacy target through 26 elements, determining local resource, understanding LCT. Now we get to the point, how do we actually distribute dollars?
Mm-hmm.
So where do they go? How does it get distributed? How does it funnel through these what we call tiers and drive dollars and resources to the districts that need them the most? Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. So there are 4 tiers of distribution, and probably the most significant one that most people recognize is Tier 1, because those are the districts that have the greatest amount of need. And the whole model is designed to drive dollars there first, which is the reason we really are going to change the game in regard to our overall funding of adequacy and equity in Illinois. But the way the tiers are organized are like this. So they're based upon a certain percentage of the appropriation. So we've used an example here of $300 million being appropriated. Well, if $300 million is appropriated, then half of those dollars are going to be targeted at districts that fit into Tier 1. 49% of that amount is going to go into Tier 2, and then 0.9% and 0.1% in Tiers 3 and 4. Now, there are some fixed sort of caps or tops on all of these tiers. So, for instance, Tier 2 is going to be all districts that are less than 90% of adequacy. Tier 3 is going to be between 90 and 100. And Tier 4 is over 100%. So those are fixed. What is not fixed is what is the percentage cutoff for Tier 1. And the reason that's not fixed is it's going to be based upon how much of the gap can be filled by an allocation of, for instance, in this particular case, $150 million. Okay, so then let's look at an example of a Tier 1 district and how that would play out for them. So we're going to assume that this Tier 1 district has an adequacy target of $10,000 per pupil, and that in all combination they have about $6,000 available to them. That would be their local resources, their CPPRT, and their base funding minimum altogether gives them about $6,000. So they have a gap, and obviously our goal is to try to fill that gap over time. Now, in the original estimates that ISB did, 64% was about to cut off on Tier 1. We're assuming it's going to be somewhere close to that when they do the fiscal 18 numbers. So I'll use that as an example. And obviously at 6,000, they're at 60%, so that puts them in Tier 1. Now the Tier 1 dollars are really going to be targeted at the gap in Tier 1. So the gap in Tier 1 for this district is $400, assuming it's a 64% cap. And we're going to fund 30% of that gap per pupil in year 1. So that district's going to get $120 per pupil allocated to them out of the Tier 1 pot of resources. But the nice thing for this district is they're also in Tier 2, because all Tier 1 districts are also in Tier 2. And now the gap we're looking to identify is the gap between where they are and 90%. So up here we wrote that up to be, the target would be $9,000 now, which would be 90% of 10,000. And so their gap is $3,000. And again, in the runs that were done for fiscal 17, Tier 2 was filling at about a 5% distribution. So another $150 per pupil will be added out of Tier 2 for this district. So 120 plus 150 would be the funding for that district.
Okay, so Mike, as I look at this, I know one of the critical objectives through our work over the last couple of years was to make sure that we didn't send any districts backwards. We didn't want anybody to lose money. We wanted no red numbers. It looks like to me that in Tier 3s and Tier 4, with the combination of the base funding minimum, at least as far as state resources, they're not going backwards. They're not going forward very fast either, but at least they're not losing any money.
That's right. And the idea of the allocation of the different appropriations is to make sure that everybody has a little in terms of moving forward, but that nobody is stepping back. Now, the only way we would step back is if the state actually didn't fund the base funding minimum, let's say, from the prior year.
Okay.
And at that point in time, then we'd have to start, walking this back a little bit. And eventually, if that was a long period of time with large cuts, then there'd have to be decreases.
Well, and so one of the things we've really struggled with in this state the last several years is the concept of proration.
Right.
In the model that we've designed, we've addressed that a little bit to make sure that we don't go back to that era again.
Right. So in the event that there is an underfunding by the state, like we had seen in the past, rather than a percentage reduction in funding, it would be a dollar per pupil. So districts that are, in these tier 1, tier 2 that are so heavily dependent on state resources, they would not have a percentage reduction in their allocations, but a per pupil dollar amount reduction, as would tier 3 and tier 4.
Okay, that would definitely soften the blow over what proration has been.
It would.
Okay.
But we need to keep our eye on this target, the $300 million minimum funding level, and even more. Because that is sort of the promise in all of this is not to go backwards in any way, but actually to continue to advance additional resources into education over time.
Well, and I think one of the things we've talked about a lot through this process is that this is an investment model. And it's really about what the state is willing to continue to put into it, but we have a means of distributing whatever dollars they choose to invest appropriately, and especially to those districts in greatest need.
Absolutely.
All right, Mike, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.